Welcome back to the program. This is our Enterprise Watch segment. The Eswatini Energy Regulatory Authority has approved an average tariff increase of 14.12% for 2025-2026 financial year. It is going to be effective 1st April this year, and 10.91% for the 2026-2027 financial year. Now, this means that the price of electricity will increase by 14.12% for domestic users and 14% for businesses for each financial year. This subsequently means that 100 Emalangeni is going to buy you 38 units for domestic use and 33 units for business use, and 32 units for small churches and small businesses in the 2025-2026 financial year. We're joined by economist Sanele Sibiya to talk to us about the impact that this will have on businesses. Sanele, let's cut to the core of this issue. Obviously, the ESERA, the Eswatini Energy Regulatory Authority, has approved an average increase of 14.12%. For domestic users, the jump is that 14.12%, while businesses see a 14% increase. Now, given the outcry from citizens who are already, crying about electricity tariffs, which are already high as we speak, was this increase truly unavoidable, or could other cost-cutting measures have been considered here?
Thank you, Mr. Nxumalo, and good afternoon to the viewer. So when we look at the request in itself, it's more of a cost recovery type of strategy. So that means what the power utility, the utility company is doing here is basically to ensure that they get enough revenues, but to actually ensure that they're able to stay afloat and they're able to do your capital replacement requirements to ensure that the power grid stays sufficiently adequate. What am I even saying? It remains well poised to meet our power needs as a country, our power demands as a country. And then to the question of whether it could have been avoidable or not. So that one depends on what you are looking at, the standpoint from which you are looking at. From the standpoint of the utilities company, number one, we know there's been that marginal increment in terms of the tariff the import tariff on our electricity. And then secondly, what we need to look at is the fact that the power utility has a number of ambitions to get us towards being an energy sustainable country. So that would somehow, it states that money is needed to finance this, and that money has got to come from somewhere. So, we've seen a couple of studies coming out in terms of whether it's feasible to enact a thermal power station in the country. And we've seen, the news coming out in that the utility company has somehow found a partner who's willing to come in and fund that project. So on those lines, one would say, yes, we do need this. And then in terms of whether or not right now is the right time, then that becomes another problem, because, as you know, consumers are faced with a very high cost of living pressure, and we're expecting that these pressures on the household sector are going to somehow take a slight back decrease when we're looking at interest rates coming down. And interest rates have come down, but right now what we're seeing is there is an entirely new quagmire that the entire globe has to deal with, that Trump issue, which might send us back into an inflationary spiral as we see more trade wars coming up. So one then would ask whether this is the right time for consumers, and what is in line to ensure that the consumers are able to meet this to meet this growing pressure on their cost of living. And over and above, this increase, Mr. Nxumalo, is not just only going to affect the direct purchase of electricity units on consumers. It is also going to translate into more inflation coming in from industry, because industry has a way of passing on that tariff increment onto the consumer. So we should likely see a bit of inflation going into April. So as of the 1st of April, we are going to see the direct effect coming into play. That's where we're going to see inflation coming up by that much amount. And then going forward, we should again see inflation on that increase, given that the input costs are going to go up, and the cost of production are going to go up, because electricity is the backbone of the production process. So with that said, then one wonders what considerations were made in terms of the consumers for those cost of living pressures. But we're yet to see the budget and how the minister plans to somehow alleviate those cost of living pressures. But it would be so unfortunate if in the budget we do not see anything that it goes towards alleviating those cost of living pressures on the consumers, to ensure they're able to deal with this new level of inflation. But we do know that there is that lifeline credit, but it works for people who consume below a certain amount of units on a monthly basis, and that one is only going to increase by 7.35% to just ensure that people can keep their lights on, because it's just that electricity that people need to then buy if they feel that these tariffs are a bit high, Mr. Numero. But right now, my main concern is, is the consumer going to be able to shoulder this cost? Because we've been on that type of austerity measures for so long, such that the wages have not yet caught up with that inflationary shock that we saw early in 2023. Well, throughout the year 2023, remember how inflation was way up through the roof, and interest rates was climbing, trying to normalize, and all of those issues. So the wages haven't quite caught up with that, and one then wonders if right now is the time to do that through a power utility that is state-owned, whether there couldn't have been any other avenues through which government could have come through to say, maybe let us give you this much, or maybe let us not take a dividend from you, because all those are policy options that they would have taken to say, no, let's not take a dividend this year so that we don't increase, just to alleviate those cost of living pressures. So I don't know what the balancing act was, Mr. Numalo, on that end.
Yeah, there's no balance. If we're being frank, there's no balancing act. I mean, taking from everything that you're mentioning, especially you saying that we still haven't really measured up to the inflationary pressures from 2023. It's 2 years later, 2025. And I suppose this development warrants why a lot of citizens are clutching their heads in disbelief. This is yet another blow to the cost of living. But let's put it into perspective. I like what our business journalist did there with the intro, in terms of spreading the idea around 100 rands, only now buying you 38 units. That is for domestic users, 33 units for businesses, and 32 units for small churches and small businesses. Pretty much, you want to say the same, what it means in practical terms. How much less power will the average household or business be able to now afford? Is that a big question now? And do we even have an answer for it? Because just like you said, you wonder what kind of balancing act there was applied.
Yeah, Mr. Numalo, like I've already said, there is going to be a direct effect, and that direct effect will be that erosion of the number of units that one could get before. But to purely understand the effect, you have got to think of the inflationary effect. What will this do to prices? So not only are you losing your units, but then also it's going to contribute to inflation. And that means whatever amount of money you had before is not going to have the same purchasing power. So that same purchasing power will decrease by more than that 14.12 for households. Probably for businesses, because they can pass on a portion of that, it will decrease by a less amount. So when we're looking at, essentially, is households are going to lose right about 16% going forward, not just through the direct effect, because you're going to have the direct effect, and that's going to be the units that you buy. But remember, energy is the backbone of the production process. Without energy, prices will skyrocket, right? So with energy now rising, that means that has to be factored into the cost of production, and you should expect your portions as well to increase, because that means now the heating sources for those people who are producing those portions are actually going to increase those costs. And then you look into your bovine industry as well, those costs are going to increase. You look into your logistics industries, again, those costs are going to increase, and they're going to get passed on to the consumer. So what we are going to see, the net effect here is there's going to be that loss of purchasing power. For example, we've already put it to say that if you're getting so many units for 100 rands, now it's going to come down to those 32 point something units. That means your 100 rands has actually lost its purchasing power, right? And then if you continue now to add on this indirect effects of this tariff, again, that's more of a loss in terms of your purchasing power. So it's a bit difficult to then quantify, because we need to start, either we can simulate and see how much this will then feed into inflation, and then we can then calculate that fall in your purchasing power. That is why we are worried about what the government is going to do when the minister tables this budget, because it is not only just the direct effect that consumers need to worry about. There is also that indirect effect that's going to go through the price mechanism that you are going to pay, determining how much you're going to pay as and when this inflationary spiral starts to set in, as this tariff increase starts pushing prices up.
Mr. Spear, thank you so much for your time. I think it is worth mentioning that EEC initially requested a 25.51 increase. There were consultations that were made after that, after the outcry that a lot of Eswatini had, that we don't know for what reasons really, but we are seeing today what this has resulted to. But as our economist weighs in, more people are continuing to weigh in. Business Eswatini, this just in, ESERA has issued